Malaysia. Welcome. Malaysia. Şu an YouTube'da yayın başladı mı hocam?
Aha.
Evet hocam, başlattım.
Başlamış hocam.
Okay, I want to open the session right now. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Dr. Eda Avcı, President of IFITT Turkey Chapter, and I welcome you on behalf of the whole organization team. I'm very pleased to open the session, which is organized by partnership of IFITT Global, IFITT Turkey Chapter, ANEHAI, and Research Fist. The session is named as a research clinic because within the scope of the event, we will get detailed information about all the process of the research design. As you know, today's distinguished invited speakers, Drs. Faizan Ali and Dr. Nisrin Amen, will answer your questions which you send us via registration forms. I would like to give many thanks to Dr. Faizan Ali and Dr. Nisrin Amen for their contributions, and also many thanks to the organization team who organized this great session under the leadership of Dr. Seden Doğan, who is the General Secretary of IFITT Turkey Chapter. And now I'm leaving the speech to the IFITT Vice President, Dr. Senem Yazıcı Yılmaz, who is the chair of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Avcı. Thank you very much for this great introduction, and thank you very much, Dr. Seden Doğan, for organizing today's session. Okay, we receive lots of questions, and we expected to receive lots of questions actually. The last time we talked about this, it was quite interesting that we have so many questions. So before we go into the deep into the questions, I would like to ask Dr. Ali and Dr. Amen to introduce yourself. I know many people know you, but to just give a brief information about yourself, we might have new participants who doesn't know us. So let's start with you, Dr. Ali.
All right, thank you, Dr. Senem. My name is Faizan. I'm an assistant, soon to be associate professor in maybe 2 weeks at the University of South Florida, a School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. I am happy to be here.
Dr. Amin.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hi, Faizan. Hi, all the participants today. My name is Nesrin Amin. I'm a lecturer in marketing at Royal Holloway, University of London, and soon to be the co-director of the Digital Organization and Society Research Center at the university. So looking forward to answering all the questions today, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much for this brief information. Now we are ready to answer very interesting research questions. So I'm just gonna start with one question. Okay, I just need to inform you, all the participants, we are trying to answer as much as questions possible. So we are starting with the why is so important to do research for becoming a good teacher? I know it's a very interesting question. So the relationship between the teachership and research. Shall we start with you, Dr. Amin?
Thank you. I think we get this question a lot. Why should I do research? I can just teach. The fact is, without being able to do research, at least on the topics that we are teaching in a way, it's not possible that much to be able to provide the most up-to-date knowledge on the topic. In many instances, we find that we use the papers that we publish or others publish in the field as teaching materials or as part of recommended readings for the modules we teach. So in a way, it's not just about disseminating knowledge, but it's also about generating knowledge. Once this knowledge is generated, then we can start disseminating in our classes. From an academic perspective, it also gives you this sort of in-depth understanding of the latest trends that are going on in the field. It's not just about reading it, but also about doing the field work, understanding what the topic is all about. And that definitely shows in the teaching and the teaching styles that we use and the way we approach the topic when teaching it. I'm sure Faizan has more to offer on this count as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Nisreen. Well, of course, it's a bit difficult to talk after Nisreen. She is so articulate. I think she covered most of the stuff. To me, I feel these days, obviously, this is one thing is your job requirement. I mean, even though we are hired as teachers, right? Like in a university, it's your basic job is to teach, but then your expectation is also to do some research. How nice it is to really actually do research on topics that you also teach, because then what you can do is you can inform your students about much more stuff. Now, I am of a big belief, I don't believe in textbooks, actually. I just feel that textbooks are good. They're really good as a reference, but they are not really up to date. I mean, even now, if you look at the latest textbooks that are available, for instance, I use marketing textbooks. And even the latest ones that are published in 2021 don't talk about COVID-19, which is a bit funny. I understand, you know, book was written much earlier than COVID-19 and then it got published and everything. But I think it's not fair to students if I just follow textbook and not really give them up-to-date information, which can be compensated with research then, because our research is always up to date. And when I say research, it's not only publications. It's not only research publications, it's also all types of other research. So I think that's why research and teaching go hand in hand. It just supplements your teaching very well.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's go with the collaboration networking. We are just doing that actually. So the question is, how to build collaboration network as a new researcher, how to approach experienced researchers. This time, let's start with you, Dr. Ali, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I believe that, you know, whenever we do collaboration, it's important to understand that either you are going to invite work with you or somebody is going to invite you, right? So either way, it's important that you should have a set of skills. So I mean, nobody is going to invite me to work with them if I don't have a proper set of skills. Same as the way I'm not going to invite somebody to work with me if they don't have a set of skills, right? So for all the young researchers, the first thing that is very important is to build up your skills. You know, collaboration and these things are going to come later on. But the first thing is to set up your skills. It's better to create your skill set in one area rather than, you know, trying to jump ships and boats in the start. And I'm again focusing mainly on young researchers, right? PhD students or those who just started. In my own case, I developed my understanding in PLS in the start during my PhD. And that helped me develop my collaborations because at that time, it was a new method. Not many people knew about it. So I slowly, gradually started doing workshops and stuff like this. Now, it's, you know, the funny thing is these days there are too many people and finding one researcher can be finding a needle in a haystack. It's the tease in one area people start knowing about. Share your knowledge, you know, so if you know about something, share your knowledge. Well, I don't think I am very busy, but I'm very sure Nisreen is very busy. I have other friends who are very busy. Every time I ask them to come and share some stuff on my channel or other platforms, they're very happy to do that. And that's how more and more people know about them. Now, in the last 1 year, I've had more collaborations than ever. And the reason was because I started making inter-network collaboration. So I knew some people, I knew some other people, connected them, and collaboration started working. So to conclude, share your knowledge on multiple platforms. Number three, don't be scared of asking people to work with you and put in the work. So that's what I would say my tips are for collaborations.
Thank you very much. Dr. Emin, what do you think about that?
I really have nothing to add to what Faizan just mentioned. It's the exact same suggestions, very similar story. So I would just echo what he just said.
Then I'll ask another very interesting question to you, Dr. Emin. How to avoid the urge of wanting to edit to the point of perfection when writing a paper? This is a very interesting question, actually.
Indeed, it's a very interesting question. I've worked with collaborators before that, they have this urge all the time. For me, I find it brilliant and fantastic to, wanting to get the work to the level that you are really, really happy with. And I think it's important to actually get it to that level. So unless you, as a writer and the author of the work, are very happy with the paper, it shouldn't be submitted in the first place. Again, the other side of it, of course, is to be obsessed with getting it to the perfection level. In my experience, I think in most cases, reviewers will have some comments that we didn't expect as authors. Despite that, we try as much as possible to address different viewpoints in our papers. And think sometimes of what the reviewers would say when we are trying to refine the paper. But one way or another, it's actually important to try and get it to the level that we are at least happy with. But also bearing in mind that there is nothing called perfection because the reviewers will always come back and try to improve the paper further. And in most cases, it's really, really helpful to actually receive these comments. I've had a few papers where they looked completely different when they were first submitted. I heard from a few colleagues that they submitted one version of a paper that they thought it was, of course, perfect. They worked on it so hard up to the level that they thought, okay, now we're really ready to submit. But then they received so many comments from reviewers at different stages. The first version of the paper became a completely different paper because of the new data that was collected and the new context that the reviewers asked them to focus on. So they ended up with two papers, the first version of the paper that they submitted in the first place, and then the new version that was accepted in this journal. So I would suggest maybe trying to balance. First of all, it has to be something that you're happy with as an author before submission. But at the same time, bear in mind that reviewers will always come back with new comments that we may not have expected to arise in the first place. And Faizan, of course, you may have more comments on that. You have more experience in this area.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nisrin. I think most of the stuff is very similar. I mean, I think the same way like you said, right? I just want to add one thing to it. I have read somewhere, it's a good saying, it says that over planning is...
and Faizan, of course, you may have...
Yeah, so I've heard somewhere that over planning is a way to kill yourself. I think sometimes it's people just, go through so many iterations that they miss the whole point. And the point is to roll out your research as soon as possible, because then it becomes out of date. And, I also, for many young researchers, or maybe I can ask Dr. Sanam or Nisrin, you, how relatable is this? Think about the time when you were a PhD student, when the first time you submitted your paper, and then every day 2 or 3 times you log into the system to check the status, like what's going on, what's going on. So, for many young researchers, this is something that they ignore, and that is the time that it takes to review and revise and resubmit and, all that. So if we keep the papers for a very long time to ourselves, thinking like, okay, when will it be ready? When will it be ready? Then we are actually trying to, or we are putting our effort to make our data set, our findings out of date, right? Outdated. So now I understand that many of us come from, developing countries where English is not the first language. Many of us think that my paper is not ready, even though paper is completely fine, but the lack of confidence or whatever. I think in that situation, instead of you looking at your paper again and again and again and again, because I assure you, if you look at your paper 100 times, you are going to make changes 100 times. It doesn't matter how many times you look at the paper. And that is why there's a fun thing, and that is final draft, final draft, final draft, one final draft, real final draft, that type of stuff, because you always keep making changes. I think in that situation, the best thing is you do your best to make sure that your paper is ready from your side, and then send it to one of your mentors or one of your very good friends that you can trust, a new pair of eyes, to have a look, and then give you some suggestions on it. And you can, and it's not only for young researchers, even experienced researchers do it. In fact, one of our papers that Dr. Nisreen and I are working on, from our side, it was completely done. Like, we were even thinking to submit it. But then Dr. Nisreen thought maybe we should send it to one colleague just to have a look, and then now we are revising the paper based on those comments. So it's very common, but I think instead of you looking at it again and again and making changes, send it to another person to have a look at.
Actually, my next question related with that. We all know supervisors are busy. So, question is coming. How can a student manage collaboration with writing a paper with busy supervisors? And what are some things that the student can do to get good feedback from supervisors about the paper? I just want to add one more thing. Maybe we can change the role here, just not only the supervisor, other advisorship, maybe we added, so voluntary advisory maybe. So shall we start with you, Dr. Ali, and then please, Dr. Amin, you next.
Yeah, so, I think it would be better if Nisreen answers this first, and I'll tell you why.
Okay, of course. Of course.
I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because when I work with my students, it's like if they are my advisor and I'm their student. Whereas I know for sure that Nisreen is a very strict person, careful, I would not say strict, but a careful person to select the students that she works with. So I would love to listen to her first, and then I'll go and tell you my experiences, the goods and the bads of being a student of your students.
Of course. Please, Dr. Amin, you start.
Thanks, Faizan. I was going to suggest that you start, but I guess I'm under the spotlight now, so I have no other option but to start. Right. I'm going to have to maybe address this in two ways. So first of all, as a supervisor, and second, from the student's perspective. So as supervisors, I completely understand we are busy most of the time. We have, in most cases, we have multiple tasks to complete every day. And we are lucky if we get to complete these tasks, in fact, because there are way too many. We always get caught up with either a meeting or something that wasn't expected on the day. So I understand this, but at the same time, personally, I do feel very, not just sympathetic, but motivated to go through a journey with the student. So for me, it's not just about being a supervisor, but it's also being a partner in this journey, seeing how the student grow and enjoy and change over time and mature, not just in terms of their research, but even the way they talk, the way they express their ideas. For me, this part is really fun. It's the part that I really enjoy. It depends on the country as well. Like for some universities here in the UK, the supervisor will have to respond within a certain period of time. So it wouldn't be so long. And they would provide the feedback, of course, in their own time as well. But the response by email would be very restrictive to a certain time period. As a student, it's, in fact, if I'm being very honest, even as a collaborator, it doesn't just have to be a supervisor. Some collaborators are really busy. It's important to also understand that the supervisor can be busy sometimes. It takes time to actually go through the work, especially if it's a PhD thesis. So different parts of the work will have to be reviewed and checked and, you know, commented on multiple times. The area may change sometimes. The literature is updated. Trying to find the right approach as well moving forward can also take time. So managing expectations is really important. It's not about, you know, getting the immediate response that wouldn't be so helpful. Sometimes we get the quick response from some supervisors, but it's not that informative, it's not that detailed. So in some cases, it might be an idea to think also that, you know, I better wait for a while until I get the very thorough feedback on the chapter I sent or the work I sent so far. I think it's important to also be patient, especially now during COVID. Most academics have had a very hard time trying to adjust the new learning environments, trying to be very supportive to their students. So I think it's a good idea to have that level of understanding that they won't be available all the time. But at the same time, send in reminders from time to time. Very gentle and nice reminders would be helpful. It's not about just sending an email and then leaving it for a month or 2 months and then send another reminder. At the end of the day, it's your right as a student to get the feedback. That goes for collaborations as well, by the way. So sometimes we do have to wait. Sometimes we switch between projects. It's normal. This is life. Sometimes life events happen as well. It's not just because they are busy. As long as we keep sort of the positive energy and we try to be able to work through things, I think it should be fine. That's the approach I've used so far. In my PhD experience, I was so lucky. My supervisor was very responsive. He would respond to my emails very quickly whenever I send an email. But at the same time, sometimes it happens to others. I fully understand that. I think being patient, but at the same time, sending reminders. And at the same time, understanding that academics are really under a lot of pressure. Maybe that's a way forward. But Faizan, I'm sure you have maybe more comprehensive comments and responses on that question as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nisreen. So of course, you covered a lot of stuff. The reason why I said you should go first is because my situation is a bit different. I don't work with my students too often. And the reason is we don't have a PhD program. So we have a master's program. Many students who come to master's program, they don't have interest in going for PhD other than some international students. So those students who come here for masters are here for like 1.5 years, and they take their research methods course in their second semester, which means that they only have less than a year left to work. So it takes a lot of time to, you know, train students as a researcher. You know, not like, sometimes you have really good students, but they need to be trained to work as a researcher, which is a very different thing. Unfortunately, fortunately for my students, I'm really happy and proud of them, that by the time they are really good researchers, it's time for them to leave as a PhD student for some other schools. Very proud of them, very proud of them. In fact, I think one of my students is in this session now, Damla, who is a Turkish also. So she's going to join University of South Carolina in August. So this is one reason why I don't have a lot of experience working with PhD students, which is more like 3-4 years thing, and you work with them, maybe publish a couple of papers. Now, what I've seen is over the years that students, doesn't matter from which country, have similar issues. Okay, one is the power distance. Of course, in many cultures, and especially in my situation, the people that I work with, they come from Asian background or Middle Eastern background, where in both of these regions, there's a huge power distance. I don't work like that. I mean, I cannot work in hierarchies and really, strong power structure places. And that's me, right? I mean, people are okay with that. I cannot work. So for me, it's much better to sit down with my students in a non-academic environment and talk to them like a person, right? Not like a supervisor. And it has worked well for me, right? Now, what I see is for students, of course, it's important to take the initiative. So what I tell my students and what I want to say on this platform is also that a supervisor means somebody who supervises you. It's not a partner. It's not a co-author. It's a supervisor. That means a person who is going to supervise you. So you have to take the lead. You have to take the initiative, and then your supervisor is going to guide you. But I understand, look, what I'm talking about, it's like science experiments, right? When we talk about physics and everything, we say in a perfect world. So I know that what I'm saying, maybe in many cases, it doesn't work like this, right? We have unethical issues, we have other problems, but let's assume that everything is normal. Students must take the initiative, do your work. Come prepared for meetings. Like Nisreen said, everybody is busy, especially your supervisors. If you think about them, they're busy. Okay. One is the amount of work they do. I'm not saying students are not busy, or students may also be busy. They might have family, they might be working and everything. But supervisors at this time, for example, if I take myself, I have to teach multiple courses. I have to grade those papers. I have to do my own research. I have to do a lot of committee work. I have to do a lot of external things, grants, and a lot of stuff, and supervision, right? So all these things and supervision. So this is one aspect to look at. The other aspect is a student. When a student look at a supervisor, the student is looking at a supervisor from one-on-one perspective, means a student and a supervisor, right? But on the other side, a supervisor is always one to many. I am working with multiple students. I'm not working with one student only, right? Multiple students. So sometimes it's possible that, if my student is not regularly taking initiative and meeting me or whatever, and after 2 months, all of a sudden my student come out like a Aladdin jinn, boom, like let's go and have a meeting. I may not remember what was going on 2 months ago or whatever. So I think it's very important that whether you're working on your thesis, dissertation, research papers, whatever it is, be prepared for your meetings, take notes. One thing worked for me very well as a student was after every meeting, I would send the notes to my supervisor. Whatever the meeting was, take short notes, send it to my supervisor. That way, both my supervisor and I would have a record of what was going on. And second, it would help my supervisor to recall the meetings that we had, right? So those type of things are important. Now, once you are done with your studies, right, as a student, when you move on to the next career stage as a postdoc or as an assistant professor or whatever, it's important to take these things with you, and that is be mindful, be respectful for people who are working with you, right? Sometimes in my country, there's a saying that says that, a bad person is better than a bad name. That means that if you have a bad reputation or a bad name, that's much more dangerous than if actually you are bad. So, and in this education sector, unfortunately, there are so few people that if you do something like this, it's very quick for your reputation to precede you and go to other people. So be very mindful of people that are working with you, that take time to work with you, and learn from them. Keep your ego aside. If you're a professor, assistant, associate, whatever is your title, keep it aside. When you are collaborating, you are at the same level. It doesn't matter if it's a student, a PhD student, whatever, it doesn't matter. Sometimes your PhD, you would be surprised that some PhD students may be much more knowledgeable than you in a particular area, right? Not in everything, maybe in a particular area. So keep your ego aside when you are collaborating. It's at the same level. Try to listen to people more than speaking. So that would help you with collaborations.
Okay, we have two more questions related with the PhD. As I understand, PhD is quite an important subject because it's the starting point of the academic life. So, and we all do PhD only once. I don't know why. Do you have any idea why do we do PhD only once? Do we know anyone who does PhD 3 times, 4 times? Do you know anyone? I mean, I don't know anyone.
I know one person who didn't do PhD twice. He also did masters twice. I know one professor who was from India, so he got his degrees, master's, undergraduate, PhD from India. But then he got a chance to come to US on a scholarship for a master's, and he proceeded with a PhD, and then he became a professor, and now he's doing a lot of stuff. So yes, I know it's not very common.
It is not very common. So
it's not very common.
We don't do this type of activities our normal life. And when we do, we have so many questions. So this is something like that, actually. What are the most common corrections from external reviewers while reviewing PhD dissertation? As far as I understand, this is a little bit more about the results of the viva or defense in US. So, Doctor, I mean, if you've been in the, and there's some noise. How do you respond to this question? What are the most common corrections from the external reviewers?
Thank you, Dr. Sanem. Can I ask, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this correctly. So is it an external reviewer or an external examiner?
It says external.
It's an external examiner for Viva.
I know, but what we received as external reviewers. So I'm not so sure exactly what it, the person is trying to ask, but let's assume that examiner rather than the reviewer, because we all know at the end is the most important thing what the examiners are thinking about our result, dissertation.
That's a very interesting question, and it's actually a very important one as well. Every PhD has its own journey, and I don't think there is any PhD that's very similar to another one. The one thing that's very common among PhD students is that they all struggled at some point during their PhD, and it was a very, very difficult time for them. So I always say, if we didn't struggle during a PhD at one point or another, it means that it's not a PhD to begin with. I'm not sure it's most common, but maybe I can talk about the most important parts that would make or break a thesis during a viva. So the most important part always is making a contribution. That's the whole idea. A strong theoretical contribution, and in many cases, a strong managerial implications at the same time. This is the first thing that external examiners will be looking at. So what are the contributions? Why is this research important? What's the problem that the student is trying to address? And why is this problem important? Very often what we see in PhD thesis is that the student talks or writes about the gap in research, which is fine, but what's missing is why is this gap important to fill? Why do we need this sort of research in the area? What kind of research are you extending and how? This is sort of the first point, and I met many even more experienced academics who I was very lucky to work with in different universities here in the UK, and they always say that the first chapter we read is the conclusion. So So they start with the conclusion, then go to the abstract, and then start going through the rest of the thesis. And the reason they look at the conclusion is that it just summarizes every part of the research, and it also clearly is supposed to be clearly presenting the theoretical contributions and practical implications. This is sort of the make it or break it. If this doesn't go through smoothly, then we are in trouble. There is an issue there. The other issues are maybe not having a good sort of collection of the literature that's related to the research, especially if the research is quantitative. Issues with the data collection, issues with the methodology, issues with the sampling size, or the sample size, or the sampling method, issues with the analysis, for example, that can be, of course, another big thing, because how valid and reliable the results are then in this case. In general, what we try and look for is rigor in research as much as possible, your understanding of the area, and your understanding of how much this area is important and is related to previous research in the field. It's also important to understand the scope of the research, so what's to be included and what's to be excluded and why. The other point, which is, I think, very important, and we kind of agree on in most cases, is the importance of justifying every step of the research. So what are the reasons for your aim? Why are these objectives valid, for example? Why are we focused on a specific body of literature rather than another? What's the justification behind the type of data that you're collecting, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, or triangulation or mixed methods? So justifying every step of the research in relation to your own research, your own idea, that's really, really important. In many cases, there is no right or wrong. The student can choose, for example, to go for a qualitative research or a quantitative one, but it must be justified and it must be very well related to the scope of the research, its aim, and its objectives. So the two maybe most important points for me, and I'm sure Faizan will be adding many more as well, is the contributions, what's been added to our existing knowledge on the topic, and the second, being able to justify the choices that have been made throughout the research. During the Viva, of course, maybe that's my last point, and then I'll stop here. It's important to show your knowledge in the area. So trying to avoid reading so much from the thesis, which is something I observed with a few experiences before. Try and use your own words, try to show knowledge in your area. We don't have to agree all the time. At the end of the day, it's your thesis. You are the one person that has been working on this research for many years. No one would know it more than you. And at the same time, being able to respond very nicely and in a humble way to the examiners. So we don't have to agree, but at the same time, we don't have to attack. These are my points to summarize. Of course, there are many more, but for the sake of time, and because I'm Faizan, of course, you have many more comments and maybe more comprehensive comments, of course, on the topic. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ali?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Nisreen. Okay, so first, like you already mentioned, Dr. Sinem, that people in different areas around the world have different experiences, right? Different methods of examination and everything. So I was very surprised when I came to US to know that you have a committee, you work with the committee, and that committee approves or rejects of your work. I studied in Malaysia and UK. The system was completely different. It was really crazy. Your work is sent to somebody you even don't know. You cannot approach them. You cannot talk to them, until they are done with your examination. So it's very different. I did a webinar a few months ago, I think, where I had a very experienced supervisor from Malaysia, one from Turkey, and one from North Cyprus, about thesis defense tips and tricks. So they talked about what do they look for things, from different perspectives. I think that is a good one to watch. in my opinion, I think what's important is to understand what is the main intention of PhD. So if you get a PhD, what does it give you, right? So, okay, can you do research without PhD? You certainly can. I mean, of course, you can do research without PhD. But in my opinion, PhD actually is a professional license to conduct research. That's what I think of it. There's nothing else. I mean, honestly, in my PhD, did I learn any new marketing concepts? Probably not. Like we studied the same things that we were taught in undergraduate. Maybe much more detail, much more depth, but same concepts, right? The same consumer behavior, same stuff, all that stuff. Research methods courses I took during my PhD, I took them in my master's, so maybe a bit more advanced, but pretty much the same thing. But one thing is that as soon as you get your PhD, then you can do your research by yourself and people are going to listen to your research because you have a PhD. So I think that's a professional license to conduct research. Now, of course, the examination is a big part of it, right? So to get your PhD, to pass the exam and everything, you need to go through that examination. So whatever Nisreen said, all of that is correct for examination, all of it, right? I say that what she said, that she reads conclusion first, I do the same thing. And I'll tell you why I do the same thing, because of two reasons. One, conclusion is, in my opinion, and I can be completely wrong, but I strongly believe that conclusion part, whether it's your thesis, dissertation, or a paper, is the part which can be completely your own part. Okay, why I say this? I say this because when you write your introduction, you are basically talking about research gaps that are depending on previous literature or other things, right? So you have to look at other things to write your research gaps. Then your literature review is 100% from other people's work, right? So you look at other people's work, you synthesize it, or whatever you do with it, but it's completely other people's work. Your methodology is a set of procedures that you pick up. So there's no creativity there, right? And your findings depend on the data. Data comes from other people, right? So you don't do any mastery there. It's coming from other people. Really, the part where you can be, it's completely your part is conclusion. How do you interpret those findings? How do you relate them, right? The famous saying about optimism and pessimism, where we say there's a glass half filled with water. Some people say it's half full, some people say it's half empty, is a classic example. There's only one thing and people look at it from different perspectives. That's how people write their conclusions, right? And I think conclusion and implication is the only part where people don't ask you to support it by theory or references or who said it, or, nobody asks you this. In literature, methodology, introduction, everywhere else, people are going to ask you, support it, who said it. In conclusion, nobody asks you this, right? So in fact, in conclusion, many cases, people ask you, where's your interpretation? This is the part where you need to write your interpretation of things, right? So you can completely own that section. The other thing is, you can be very artistic with your conclusion. You can go beyond really the paper and talk about things that not many people have thought about before. So I agree to Nisreen on that point 100%. I feel that the one thing that is important in PhD specifically is your theoretical contribution. Like Nisreen said, that you should know on your fingertips, okay? But theoretical contribution is not a reference from 2020 paper saying that we need more studies on this topic. That is not a theoretical contribution, right? So you really need to think about what is it that you are explaining that people haven't thought about before, or it's a new perspective on a phenomena or whatever, right? So theoretical contribution. Literature review, many people spend too much time on literature for their defense, which in my opinion is not a wise idea to spend too much time. Now, you should know the main literature in your area, right? The main theories in your area, maybe main authors, what are their stances and everything. Not too much time on it. You should have a very good command of your methodology, not only your methodology, but the things that you didn't pick up. So let's say if you did a survey method, you picked up a survey method or survey approach for your thesis, you should also be able to say why you didn't go for a focus group, why you didn't do an interview, right? Because your examiners may ask you, Why did you not go for a qualitative research approach in this study, right? So you should be able to justify your choice and also know the other things. For findings, I think it doesn't matter too much because it's all, tables and statistics and what's coming. But then coming to conclusion is also important. So conclusion is where you need to talk about what does your study mean to anybody, right? And I tell people sometimes when I talk to my kids, I want to tease them. So whatever they tell me, then I ask them why, So after 4 or 5 whys, they become frustrated. So either they leave me alone and go, or either they try to fight with me or something, right? But there's no argument after that. I think you as researchers need to really think of your research in that situation, okay? So imagine you go and you're very excited, you tell somebody, I did all this work, blah, 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 this is my finding, everything. And then this person asks you, so what? Why? Why should I care? That is what you need to know. Because if you don't, you are in a trouble.
I understand, and I totally agree, both of you, because we have so many very interesting questions, and to use the time wisely, I'm gonna go back to the very beginning of the PhD, and it is going to be the last question related with the PhD. I ask these questions a different way. There's a specific reason. I always start from the end and go back to the beginning, because if you know what is end, you start much better. That's what I believe, actually. So how many papers would be sufficient for a literature review for a PhD topic? I rephrase this question actually in my way. When I was thinking about doing a PhD, I start searching what is a research gap and what I like to study, what I like to do a research. It took me a month and maybe more than a month to look at it, the different angles in different areas. And then I sent lots of emails to many professors asking, I would like to study this and I would like to look this. What do you think about? And actually, I was lucky. Many of them respond me. And I got my research topic at the end of 6 months. So it took me a lot of time, but it was interesting to go through these experiences. So, Dr. Eman, what do you suggest to finding a PhD topic? What do they need to do?
Thank you, Dr. Sanem. Maybe this time, Faizan, you'd like to start, and then I'll follow. I think we both have a different issue, actually. We have so many ideas and not so much time to implement all these ideas in research. But it will be nice to maybe hear from Faizan first, and then, of course, I'll follow.
Thank you very much. So, okay, so I'll also take your first part of the question, that was how many papers are important or necessary for PhD. There's no magic number. It's not like I'll tell you, if you want to write 10,000 words, you should read 10 papers. It's not like that. I think the good question to ask is, am I covering all the issues around this topic in my literature? And if you are, then you are good. If you are not, then you are in trouble. So how many papers may not be a good way to go for a PhD student, okay? Unfortunately, this is what many students are doing, download 40 papers, 50 papers, 60 papers, and then thinking that I've read enough to cover everything. I think that's not a very good idea. Now, the second part of the question was, how do you come up with an idea? What type of things you need to do to come up with a research idea or research gap or whatever? So, okay, I want to tell you one very quick story. I had a student. This student was very interested in a topic called word of mouth. So this student came to me and said, like, Professor, I want to work on this topic. And I said, okay, why you want to work on this topic? So the student said, I just want to work on word of mouth, right? I mean, in my opinion, I thought word of mouth is studied well enough. So it's not a good idea. So I asked the student, maybe you can go and read a few more papers and then let's talk maybe after a couple of days. I thought maybe the student is going to change her mind, but she came to me after 3 days and still stuck on word of mouth. So then I told her, okay, maybe you can go back and read some Journal of Business Research and Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, some mainstream journals. I thought maybe she is going to look at some other topics. So she came back to me and she said that, well, I am interested in positive and negative word of mouth. Okay. So, it kept going after a month. She was still stuck on word of mouth. Now, what happened after that, I don't want to say that, but I'll just tell you this. If anybody has ever tried skydiving, anyone, I don't know if anybody have ever tried skydiving. In skydiving, what happens is when you go up, right, 10,000 feet, 12, 15,000 feet in the plane, and they are pushing you a little bit towards the door of the plane so that you can jump, right? Now, not many people in their sane mind are going to jump off the plane, right? You don't want to jump. So what they do is right on that door before you jump, the person behind you is going to say something completely stupid and irrelevant that has nothing to do with skydiving or you or that environment, just something different. And within the next second, you are in the air. So what happens is basically it's psychology. They say something so that your brain actually try to catch what is this person saying, and then right at that time they push you, so you don't have to be very, I tell my students this story when they are picking up a topic. I say, if you have something really hard stuck in your mind, that may kill you actually. So don't be too rigid on topics before you actually read something. Right? So yes, maybe you have interest in word of mouth, that's fine, it's okay. But try to read a little bit out of word of mouth to see, maybe you can connect word of mouth with something else, something relevant, something interesting, whatever. But try to explore in the start, because once you start working on it and you proceed further, then it would be a bit late to come back and change your topic, right? In my experience, the topics that I have worked on, some of the papers that I loved that I worked on were the papers that were out of my area, not like really the things that I've studied. So some papers I studied journals related to psychology and picked up some interesting stuff from there and then implemented. Yesterday, Nisreen shared a paper that is not a paper, just the title, and the title seemed quite interesting. What was it? You show me your mobile, I'll show you who you are, something like that. It seemed quite interesting to me, and I'm waiting when is it going to come so I can read it. So I think to get an idea, go out of your comfort zone a little bit, read a little bit more stuff out of your discipline to pick up some good ideas. Those students who are in marketing right now, in marketing or consumer behavior or that type of stuff, I would highly recommend you to go and read editorials written by Mark Rosenbaum, the editor of Journal of Services Marketing. It's unbelievable. Like you read those editorials, and then you would be like, all these things are always so much in front of me, but I never thought about them. So that is how you get good ideas to work on. That is how you get good, quick acceptances for your papers, because people are interested to read those type of things. And then,
so what you are saying, actually, it's not just for the PhD topic, in general, research topics, and anything. So it's very good idea. Thank you very much. So would you like to continue?
No, sure, yes, Dr. Nisreen, yes.
Thank you so much. Well, Faizan covered it in a comprehensive way. I can definitely, I agree with everything he said. Maybe I can just add a few points based on my students' experience. So one way, for example, to think of a project or think of what you'd like to do for your PhD is to reflect on your own earlier studies. For example, as part of my role for our postgraduate digital marketing program, our students at Royal Holloway are exposed to and study a number of very interesting cutting-edge topics in the area of digital marketing. And some of them think of doing a PhD. Some of them already started actually doing a PhD and then doing wonderfully well afterwards. What I suggest is think of the modules that you completed as part of your MSc program or MA or whatever master's program that you've completed. So which topic did you find interesting? Which assignment did you find that you're not even doing it as an assignment? You'd like to explore the topic further. So this is sort of the easiest way. Reflect on your earlier studies and try to find a broad topic, any module that you really enjoyed, and which part of this module did you enjoy the most? Another way of looking at it also is exactly what Faizan mentioned earlier, is look at literature reviews, look at editorials. So for example, one of my fantastic colleagues who I had the pleasure to work with last year, and we continuing with more projects this year, is Justin Paul, the editor-in-chief of International Journal of Consumer Studies, which has actually increased its ranking this year, which is absolutely great. But he specializes in literature reviews, and he does it in a very comprehensive way usually. So read literature review papers. Usually at the end of these papers, you will find a number of research questions in the area that are really important in terms of advancing the areas. And these are the questions that have not been answered so far in the literature. So look into this, try and find the topic that is really interesting to you. I must also mention that it's equally important, it's not just about the struggle of finding the topic, it's equally important to be very open-minded, exactly what Faizan just mentioned earlier. Be very open-minded with your topic, and that's what I usually explain to the students even before accepting their supervision. At the very beginning, and I do a number of interviews to make sure that it's the right student for the program and meets the expectations of the university. And as someone I would really like to supervise and work with as well, making sure that it's explained really earlier on that, be open to the topic. You don't have to be very stuck with this particular topic. You might explore another area that's relevant and interesting, and you find that the topic has changed, or you'd like to change it a bit further. You might look at it from a different perspective. And it may not even happen within the first 2 weeks or 1 month. I have a fantastic PhD student who started with us about a year ago. And, at the beginning, it's very difficult because you have the broad topic in mind, but you're not sure in which direction you'd like to go and explore the topic further. And the initial idea was to look into very much of a quantitative study. But then after exploring all the literature and the topics that have been coming up in the literature, especially that the topic is very much trending at the moment, the decision was to start with focus groups. That would provide sort of a new perspective, especially that the topic is being studied in quantitative or using quantitative approaches recently. So because she was very clear from the beginning, I made it very clear at the beginning that, be open to new areas, be open to changes in this journey. There is no single PhD journey that went on exactly as planned from A to Z. It doesn't work this way. And in fact, that's the brilliant way of, I think, enjoying the journey as well. Be open to changes throughout. It really helps. And it's making sure that the topic is relevant. And a PhD, yes, in a way, is a ticket to get into academia. I understand that. But at the same time, remember, this is your own ticket. Your name will be related to this PhD. In the UK, for example, the PhD thesis will be presented in or be documented in the British Library. So this is something that's under our name for the rest of our life. This is your entrance to academia. So you'd really like the work to be as perfect as possible and as relevant as possible. And what might be relevant in 2021 and is very trending may not be entirely relevant in 2025, let's say, if you're planning to do a PhD for a few, of course, for maybe more than 3 years. So these adjustments throughout the way helps you also to stay relevant, the topic to be relevant, and you're exploring your options. It's a journey that you really enjoy. If we're stuck with a topic for so long, we may not end up with what we really want or where we really want to be. Just before, I know Faizan, you have your hand up as well. I'm just going to just mention one example. The ideas would usually also not just come from the literature, it can be your own experience. I can give you a couple of examples. We had the GDPR, the General Data Protection Act, introduced in the UK a few years ago. And I wasn't into cybersecurity or security behavior and all that. That wasn't part of, it's not that I wasn't into it. It wasn't part of my PhD, and I was still an early career researcher. But I was asked by the institution I was working for to make sure that I do the training for the GDPR. And I was doing the training, and while I was working, on answering all these online questions, I was thinking, you know what, this is very new. I don't think anyone has done any research in this area. How about I start something, look into the research in this area and see how the GDPR is playing in the area of cybersecurity. And it ended up with 3 papers published in 3 top journals. Another example, and I'm going to stop after that, Faizan, I'm sure you'll add great comments as well. I was shopping during a holiday in Dubai, and I'm someone who really likes shopping in shopping malls. Whenever I travel, that's usually the beginning of my holiday. And it just happened that I shopped from a leading cosmetic brand there in terms of skincare and cosmetics. And I noticed the technologies used in store. So they had some sort of technologies that I haven't seen here in the UK. That was really, really interesting to me. Some VR, AR, and iPads everywhere and all that. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is new. Let's have a look a bit more into these in-store technologies and all that. And I was taking pictures while I was on holiday with my kids. And then I kept on reading about the topic. And exactly as I mentioned, I was reading a lot of Mark's work, Journal of Service Marketing, a bit of CHB work, and some papers in this area. And then I came up with the topic, and again, it ended up with 3 papers in leading journals. One of them hopefully will be out next week. So it can sometimes, the idea can be just from your own personal experience, something that you really enjoyed and you want to go back to and explore in the literature and see what was done and if you can do something new about it. So I'm going to stop here. Sorry, I've taken so long. Faizan, please, if you can add to this.
Sure. I think, listen, you obviously covered a lot of things, right? I just want to say that normally I tell my students, and I'm sorry for the noise, it's the lawn mower, they're cutting the grass. So I normally tell my students to keep an area of focus. Don't jump from here to there to here, right? So let's say if you want to work in technology adoption, then work in that for a few years. Do your research in that area to develop an expertise. What I've seen recently, and that's a bit, I don't know what to call it. I would just say it's an interesting trend. Like Dr. Jehan says, for something he doesn't agree to, he just calls it interesting. So just it's an interesting trend that many young researchers these days stay loyal to their methodology and not the topic. So I've seen that, okay, if I'm really good at, let's say, structural equation modeling, then I just stay true to structural equation modeling. Every paper I use that, and the topics can be anything. I feel that's a bit interesting trend. I think you should keep one area, like a conceptual area, right? Or maybe theoretical area. Methods you can diversify. In fact, that can be a good way of collaborating with other people. In the last year, 2020, I had some really amazing collaborations with people that I absolutely love for their capabilities, abilities, but then also they're amazing human beings, really good to work with. The topic was within consumer behavior domain, but we worked on several different type of methodologies. that gave me so much more to learn, you know, and that's the motivation for me to collaborate with people. So right now, for the second time, with Nisreen, I'm working on a paper that is a multi-study paper. Now, I never work on something like this before, but that's the first time. Just recently, we published a paper in Journal of Business Research that is a completely new methodology, interpretive research methodology, which was a completely new thing for me. So, you know, if you want to collaborate and also learn as a researcher, I think stay true to your area, just focus on your area, but then with methodologies, because they're always evolving and, you know, there's so many different type of methodologies, make sure that you try to understand other methodologies or work with people who are expert in other types of methodologies as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask last two questions. Time flies. So as you just entered to the methodology, and it's very important actually, and most probably we will ask you to do another session related with the methodology. I'm sure there are many questions about the methodology. So how to minimize the biases on the part of researcher who conducts qualitative data collection and data analysis as part of research? Whoever wants to start, you may start.
Is this for qualitative or quantitative?
It doesn't mention the person who writes this question, so you can answer from different angles which one you want.
Okay, so Faizan, would you like to start with the qualitative bit, because I'm not experienced in this area. I'm a quantitative researcher. I understand you do a lot of interviews with qualitative researchers, so I'm sure your response will be much more comprehensive.
Yeah, so I also am a quantitative researcher, but you know, I work with some people in qualitative research, try to understand, try to learn. One thing good about qualitative research is that it's different, and that's what many qualitative researchers say, right? They say that two people are different, the answers are not always the same. So don't hold me responsible for whatever I say. I'm gonna use the justification provided by qualitative researchers to answer this question. So I think the good part about qualitative research is that you can go much more in depth about the things that you are exploring or investigating because you have more time with one respondent. The question specifically asks about minimizing the bias, right?
Yes,
Again, look, the thing is it necessary to minimize the bias? That's also one question, right? So in different approaches, let's say if you are in an approach of observation, let's say, observation, you really cannot minimize bias because you are observing something, you are a human being, you have to look at things and report them. And we know that everybody, no matter how much they claim to be unbiased, have biasness, so you cannot really minimize bias there. Then let's say if you are conducting interviews on a topic that you are very sensitive about, so even though you try very hard to minimize the bias, it's difficult, right? So first of all, whoever is doing qualitative research is aware of this, that, you know, this particular methodology is really prone to biasness. And one justification for qualitative research is that the researcher is part of the research. You know, whether you are interviewing people, you're observing, you're leading a focus group, whatever you are doing. So that is one thing. Now, there are obviously some strategies where you can ensure that the bias is avoided or maybe minimized to some extent, right? One of them is to try to use multiple people to code the data. And this many times you would see when people are writing their methodology or findings, they do mention that they use multiple people to code the data so that, you know, you have multiple perspectives to look into things. The other one is you always can send your findings to your respondents to comment on it if that is exactly what they wanted to say. Many times that happens, you know, if I don't know if anybody has worked with a newspaper, but if somebody interviews you for a magazine or a newspaper, normally they would send you back whatever they wrote to make sure that this is what you meant. The third one is try to get multiple sources of data. That's same for quantitative as well, but for qualitative it matters because your respondents are less in number. Sometimes you interview 10 people, 20 people, 15 people. So you can supplement it with some sort of secondary data or document analysis or historical analysis or whatever stuff like this. And then the other one is you can also get your peers to review your results. So remember one thing that for quantitative research, if you if you ask somebody, are you happy with this? And you give them a scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And somebody clicks on 3 or 4. You show it to 100 people. 100 people are going to say that this person says agree to your question, right? But with qualitative research is more like a woman when they go to attend a wedding wearing a dress, and then they come back and say, that person looked at me like this. Did that person look at me like this? Did that person smile for me? Something like this. We're always thinking. So qualitative research is more like this. You ask somebody, how do you feel? They may say, okay. So a qualitative researcher would also take a meaning of body language, stuff like this, right? So there can be multiple explanations for something. So to avoid biasness in that, you can always ask some of your peers or somebody to review your results. And that's what I would say, based on my limited understanding of qualitative research.
Thank you. Dr. Emil, would you like to add?
Not for qualitative research. I'm sure Faizan has a much more knowledge in this area. For quantitative research, in general, is very much based on the literature. So, of course, I don't think there is ever a zero bias method, but it's very much driven by the literature, it's very much driven by the hypothesis. If a hypothesis is rejected, for example, there is no way to claim that this relationship is supported. So it's very much driven by the literature and the hypothesis. So I think there is less room. But of course, the researcher's interpretation, the researcher's justification, the context of the research, and how the proposed hypothesis apply to that particular context. These are all issues that the researcher works on. And Faizan, I'm not sure if you'd like to add more to this.
Thank you very much. So, shall I go through the last question?
Yes,
okay.
Please.
The final question, actually, it's covering up everything. So it's the end. When do you feel like you are ready to submit a journal?
Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at this one quickly. This is an interesting question. I think, to be honest, I mean, if I look at myself today, like right now sitting, I think I'm ready to submit a paper, but at the same time, I'm really not ready to submit a paper. It can be either way, right? So like I said in the first question, if you as a researcher think that you have enough skills to write a paper independently, then I think you are ready to submit a paper to a journal. But let's say if you think that you don't have all the skills that are needed, and believe me, there's a lot of skills that are needed to write a paper, then you need to find a good team to work with, a good proper team of collaborators to work with to develop your work into a paper and then submit it. But this question doesn't have a lot of details. I saw this question, like, when are you ready to submit a paper? Now, in many groups that I'm part of on Facebook or social media, I see that people are sharing stuff about different things. It's a bit dangerous, actually, people sharing things on Facebook and other things saying how to publish, or, how to publish and talk to your journals. I talk about this topic also, but I say these are my experiences, and my experiences can be very different from other people's experiences. It can never be the same. So when was I ready to submit my first paper? Second semester of my PhD. I submitted a paper to a top tier journal in hospitality. It was just rejected. I felt the pain at that time, which was really bad. But then I took that one as a motivation to really understand what's wrong with me, rather than blaming the journal or blaming the editor or blaming the reviewers. I really tried to understand what was wrong with me, and there was a lot of stuff that was wrong with me. So obviously I improved my writing and everything, but at the same time I decided to learn the whole process. So the first paper then I submitted was a journal that was, I mean, it was published by one of the universities in Malaysia. So it was not a bad journal, but it was also not a very good journal. It was just a so-so journal. So I submitted it there just to get the hang of, how does this work? So it went through some reviews. Obviously, the quality of reviews were not very good, but it was something. Learn from there how to publish and, how to submit and how to deal with things. 2 papers like that, and then the next 10 to 12 papers were all Scopus Index journals, so a bit higher level, try to learn things, and then moved on to SSCI. So my first SSCI paper was published in 2015, after I was graduated from PhD actually. So I submitted the paper while I was a PhD student, but it got accepted and published 6 months after I was already done with PhD. So, I mean, I took the long route, and which I'm proud of because it helped me learn a lot. And now this year, I published 13 papers this year, and all of them are SSCI and top tier journals. So it's a process that you go through, right? Now, if you start blaming people in the start for telling you that, your work has some limitations or it's not good or whatever, then it's difficult for you really to achieve things because you're not looking at your own mistakes or shortcomings. So that's what my answer to that question is.
Thank you, Dr. Amin.
Thanks. Very similar to Faizan's response, but I was also writing some notes on that. I think there are a few steps to maybe check and follow before submission. And there is something very important to be, keep in mind during the submission. So let me start with during the submission. I'm just like you, Dr. Sanem. I'd rather start from the end. I think it's important to be brave. Bear in mind that rejection is part of it. And it doesn't always 100% link to the quality of the paper. Sometimes it's a scope. Sometimes, for example, let's say I'm editing a special issue now in one of the top journals and information systems in this area, like in IS. And very often I receive submissions that are really good. The topic is really good. The paper is very well written, but it's not within the context of the special issue. The special issue is focusing on a specific area. Same thing goes for many journals. They are specifically focusing on specific areas. Because we are new researchers in some cases, so we may not know what the scope and aim of every journal is, what journals or what specific journals are looking for in terms of submissions. So it may be that the topic itself may not be suitable for that particular journal. So my comment on that would be brave. You don't have to avoid rejections all the time. Rejections are going to happen. In fact, for me, the least painful rejections are the desk rejections. The most terrible rejections are the rejections that happen after a year or 2 years, and after multiple revisions, and after the paper has gone through so many changes and it changed into something new to please the reviewers, and then it doesn't go through. And I have faced this situation actually twice last year, and that was much more painful than having a desk rejection. Once a paper is desk rejected, I always say try and recover very soon. So don't keep it on the desk thinking that it's not good enough. That's not the way forward. Aim for another journal. Always have at least 2 or 3 journals in mind for a specific paper. There is no paper that fits one journal only. it's not a dress at the end of the day. It can fit multiple journals. You got to be able to be open-minded and make some changes according to the journal that you're trying to submit to. So my first comment would be brave, don't be afraid of rejections. I always say this story. I worked on my very first paper for 6 months, and it's for a top US journal in the US, and I submitted it midnight, and it got rejected within half an hour. And that's after 6 months of hard work. But with experience and with multiple submissions and with, being connected to different teams and collaborators and learning from the collaborators I work with. And by the way, they don't have to be senior collaborators or senior academics. In fact, for me now, I enjoy working with academics from very different backgrounds, from very different, experience levels and years of experience, and we enjoy. It's very important to also enjoy the experience. It's not just about working with a senior academic that will help to get the paper to a good level for a specific journal. So this is just to highlight at the submission stage. So when you are submitting, be open-minded, and we've all been through these stages. I still, log into journal systems and check the status of my papers nearly every day. It's something that I'm addicted to, so it's not going to change over time. And I think as long as we're passionate about what we are doing, it should be fine. A checklist to bear in mind before submitting as well. First of all, read the papers published in this journal as much as possible. The papers, not just the journal papers, the papers related to your own area as well. So especially the papers that were published in the last 12 months, let's say. How were they written? What was the kind of work that they were doing? How is your research relevant to this kind of work? Read the journal's instructions, the author guidelines, really, really important. Some journals, like for example, British Journal of Management is fantastic. It's one of the leading journals here in the UK. We all love it. It's very much multidisciplinary, but the word count is 8,000 words only, and they are very specific in terms of the styling and formatting. One thing that's really, really important, and I always encourage my PhD students to do, and in fact, they do it very often, is before reaching that final stage of submission, make sure that your work is presented in different conferences and workshops. It doesn't mean that we have to submit a full paper. We can just submit an abstract and present the research. You will be surprised by the amount of support and the amount of feedback and ideas that come during workshops. In fact, some of the leading journals like MISQ and others, they encourage you to present your work in their own workshops, and they usually have, I think, a track in some conferences as well. And they specifically mentioned that, we'd love to read or get submissions from authors who have presented their work in these workshops. It gives you a great space to get feedback on the work earlier on as a checkpoint and then move into the next stage. I can't emphasize this anymore, but really writing. Read and write as much as possible. And reading doesn't always make writing a better or make writing better. It's important to be able to write. It's important to ask others to read your work and make sure that it's nicely presented and understandable from their perspective. Get others to read your work, and it doesn't have to be a senior academic. You can ask a colleague, for example, one of your colleagues who's doing a PhD, even in a different area, but they have some sort of experience in reading papers. They can give you some good insights, especially if they are second year or third year students. So there is of course, there are many more points. For the sake of time, I can stop here. But yeah, have this checklist in mind. And at the same time, if you don't try, you're never going to know what the outcome is. And we all tried and failed at some point. And it's these experiences that help us to continue and publish in journals and try and enjoy the journey. Sometimes we enjoy the journey as much as the outcome, or sometimes even more, actually.
You just said the right thing. It's the most right thing. So enjoying the journey, it's the most important part, I guess. Thank you very much. I know I have many questions, but I should stop it now. But may I ask you to join another session in coming months? So we may do another sessions, and we would love to have you again.
It will
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Faizan Ali. Thank you very much, Dr. Nesrin Emin. And I'm Dr. Senem Yazıcı. And on behalf of the IFITT Turkey organization, Dr. Eda Avcı and Dr. Seren Doğan, we would like to thank you for joining today's session. Next time, we will do another Q&A session, and hope you all enjoy today. We were live on YouTube. You can continue, or you can rewatch again this session anytime you want on our YouTube channel. And please don't forget to subscribe so you can follow up us on our social media. Thank you very much for joining today. Thank you, Dr. Faizan Ali.
Thank you.
Dr. Nesrin Emin. Can
Thanks.
we have one more final picture? So I will remove the spotlights with all our participants. One more minute.
Okay, I will take a picture.
1 minute, and then, yeah.
Please open your.
If you're available, could you please open up your cameras so we can have a big picture for today's memory? Go ahead, Eda.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining today's Q&A session. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Eda, direkt end of meeting yapabiliriz.